In Scotland, a secret order formed during the Holy Crusades still practices medieval rites that were once punishable by death. While in England, hundreds of modern-day Druids descend on Stonehenge and worship ancient Celtic gods. As we approach a new millennium, more and more people are turning to the sacred societies of the past for spiritual enlightenment. What is the growing appeal of these ancient sects? Could these societies have possessed higher knowledge that has been lost over the centuries? Hello, I'm Bill Curtis. On this program, we explore the mysterious appeal of two ancient societies, the Knights Templar and the Druids. First, we explore the Order of the Knights Templar, who some claim possess a relic from the 1st century AD that could shake the very foundations of Christianity. Then in Northern Ireland, a Druid priest says he has discovered the secret of stone circles and speaks to the long-forgotten gods who inhabit them. And finally, the leader of one of the largest Druid orders in the U.S. says that she is the reincarnation of a Celtic priest who lived 2,000 years ago. What draws modern-day worshippers to these ancient orders? Are they looking for answers in a romanticized vision of the past? Or have they uncovered secrets that, for most of us, remain unexplained? Few sacred societies have stimulated as much mystery and speculation as the Knights Templar. No esoteric group has lasted as long or performed more controversial rituals than this still thriving organization. Brandishing archaic dress swords and adorned in medieval emblems, members of the Chicago Order of Knights Templar rehearse for a ceremony. A branch of Freemasonry, the Templars claim 200,000 members in the U.S.
Right and left oblique.
Every week they meet behind closed doors and perform obscure rites handed down to them for generations. Infused into all of their rituals is a belief in chivalry and a willingness to lay down their lives for the preservation of Christianity.
We pledge, and that's the only pledge that you're asked to give, is that you would be willing to give your defense of the Christian religion. And as you learn this, it goes to your mind, and eventually it settles in your heart, and you start to live it.
Among their customs is the adoration of a skull, the original meaning of which has been long debated. Even today, Templars are reluctant to discuss the icon's significance.
The head is part of the ceremonies, and there are lessons to be learned from it.
These lessons are known only to initiated members of the organization. Masonic Templars derive much of their inspiration from an older order in Scotland. This society is not connected with Masons. Instead, it traces its lineage back to an enigmatic band of warrior monks who fought in the medieval Crusades. These men believe that by their actions they are keeping alive the archaic traditions of one of the Western world's first secret societies. They also worship behind closed doors and fiercely safeguard the meaning of their rituals. However, in private ceremonies like this one, the icon of the severed head can also be seen.
The skull is to remind people that they are mortal and that they are heading for death, and that within this life they must be chivalrous.
Yet some people believe there is far more behind this head worship than the Templars will admit. Several years ago, English author Keith Laidler became obsessed with unraveling the mystery of what this skull is supposed to represent. He began to research the origins of the Knights and discovered that the head had always been among the Order's most treasured relics.
The Templars were a very secretive order, and when they actually had the head out to adore it, everything was closed off. It was only held in Paris, and in closed members of the chapter, who were the great men of the order, were allowed to see it. And I began to wonder if it was a real head, then it belonged to someone, and what was the identity of the head, and that's what really started me off.
Laidler now believes that the skull represents the mummified head of Jesus Christ, which he contends is still hidden in a subterranean vault in a Scottish chapel. Laidler's theory traced the origins of the Templars' rituals to medieval Jerusalem, when the Crusades were at their peak. In the year 1118, a small band of knights formed to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the holy city of Jerusalem. No part of the city was more sacred than the Temple Mount. It was here where King Solomon built his opulent palace to house the Ten Commandments, and where Jesus was said to have been placed after his crucifixion. In exchange for their service to the pilgrims, the knights requested permission to build their headquarters on the Temple Mount.
King Baldwin of Jerusalem granted to the founding members of the order a little piece of land underneath the southeast corner of the Temple Mount, which was referred to as Solomon's Stables. In the first 9 years, this is where they called a home base.
Because of their privileged place of lodging, the knights became known as the Templars. Laidler claims there is evidence that, in addition to their duties for the pilgrims, the Templars also carried out excavations deep beneath Solomon's temple. He believes that the Templars eventually uncovered the crypt where Jesus had been buried by a man named Nicodemus, a high priest who worked at the temple. If this was so, it would be in direct conflict with the New Testament, which states that Jesus' entire body rose to heaven after his resurrection. But Laidler says he discovered a passage in the Gospel of John that convinced him that at least the head of Jesus had been mummified.
John's Gospel tells you that Nicodemus came to the sepulchre carrying 100 pounds of embalming spices. It's very hard to even carry that. It's an enormous amount. That made me think, something was happening here. And then later on, I found the continuation of the Old French Perceval, which is a medieval manuscript. This statement that Nicodemus had in his possession a head of Jesus that was so lifelike, only God could have made it. I mean, what are we to think?
Laidler contends that the head of Christ was one of the sacred relics Templars took with them when they returned to France after the Crusades. There, the knights continued to carry out secret initiation rituals. By the early 14th century, Templars had grown to include over 1,000 members and had accumulated great wealth. Their increased power troubled Philip le Bel, the King of France. In 1307, he used the Templars' strange religious practices as a call to arms, ruthlessly slaughtering hundreds of Templars and imprisoning hundreds more. The reason for the persecution was said to be the Templars' heretical crimes against the Church, but most historians agree it was at least partially to gain control of their vast treasury.
Now, the only way that Philip could acquire these assets was to accuse them of heresies, which he indeed did in 1307, with the Templars being arrested on Friday the 13th of October, which is a real reason why Friday the 13th is celebrated these days as an unlucky day.
Most of the Templar leaders, including Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, were branded heretics and burnt at the stake. Transcripts from the trial show that among the blasphemies de Molay confessed to was the worship of a lifelike head. Fearing for their lives, surviving Templars gathered up their sacred relics, loaded their ships, and set out to a place where the Church could not touch them. The Order of the Knights Templar is one of the Western world's longest-lasting sacred societies. Much of the group's appeal derives from its obscure initiation rituals. Now the answer to perhaps its greatest mystery, why the Templars worship a severed human head in their ceremonies, may lie in their strange activities in Scotland. For 6 years, English author Keith Laidler has been trying to unravel this obscure history of the Knights. He traced their beginning from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem to France, where they were branded heretics by the medieval Catholic Church. Following their escape from persecution, the Templars journeyed over 500 miles north to Scotland, the only safe haven left for them in Europe.
When the Templars left France, the only place where the Pope's writ didn't run was Scotland, because Robert the Bruce at the time, the King of Scotland, had been excommunicated by the Pope. So there was nothing further the Pope could do to force him to return the Templars.
In the year 1307, the Knights settled in this tiny village near Edinburgh, still called Temple. There, Laidler maintains, they continued practicing secret rituals involving severed heads. Evidence of this can be seen in their burial practices. After being placed in his coffin, a knight's head would be removed and put on his chest. An icon of this would appear on his headstone to identify him as a member of the order. The image of the skull and bones was born. Laidler is convinced the Templars were obsessed with the symbol of the skull because they believed they had in their possession the embalmed head of Jesus Christ. He also thinks he knows where this relic may still be buried, in nearby Rosslyn Chapel. Constructed by a local earl with family ties to the Templars, few buildings in Scotland have created as much speculation as Rosslyn Chapel. Chiseled into the church's walls and pillars are hundreds of obscure images. Among them are several motifs that connect the chapel with the arcane rituals of the Templars. But perhaps the most provocative link to the Knights may be the foundations of the chapel itself.
If you take the ground plan as drawn by the Knights when they were excavating the Temple Mount, we find that the building of Rosslyn literally echoes the ground plan of the Temple of Solomon. And that's probably the greatest connection between the Templars and Rosslyn.
For Laidler, entering the chapel for the first time was a revelation.
I've never seen anything like it. When you go inside, there's a profusion of symbols. You could spend 2 lifetimes trying to decipher every symbol in the place.
Key to the ongoing mystery of Rosslyn is a document from the year 1620 that alludes to a sealed vault somewhere beneath the chapel.
My own grandfather was caretaker in the castle and chapel during the war. And as a small boy, he initiated me into a lot of mysteries of Rosslyn. But there is no clear idea of where the entrance to the vault is.
Laidler became convinced that if the head of Christ exists, it might be hidden in this vault. In 1996, he made several trips to the chapel, trying to decipher its many obscure engravings. He was eventually drawn to this pillar near the altar. The column, more ornately carved than all of the others in the chapel, was dubbed the Apprentice Pillar by local historians, after a legend surrounding its creation.
Master builder who built Rosslyn, he made the pillars except for the one made by his apprentice, which was quite magnificent. And he was so furious at being outdone by his own apprentice that he killed him. And it's been known as the Apprentice Pillar ever since. But Rosslyn Chapel's like that. It's full of stories and mystery and so on.
The Apprentice Pillar itself is carved as a tree of life. Jesus is the tree of life. Also, at the base of the pillar, there is a serpent surrounded by Masonic and Templar motifs. And I think by showing the serpent, Sir William Sinclair, who built this place, is actually pointing to something beneath the earth in the roots of this tree of life, this stone tree of life.
Could Laidler's claim that the Templars have long worshipped the mummified head of Christ be proven by historical evidence?
As far as the Templars being arrested for venerating the severed head of Jesus Christ, there is simply nothing historically proven on that basis. All the leading scholars of Knights Templar history are in agreement that it was on the basis that Philip le Bel, the King of France at that time, coveted the Templar assets for himself. The only way that he could do that was to trump up charges that the Knights Templar were heretics.
We are not worshiping that head. The head teaches you that this is a relic, and you one day will be that relic, that you're here for a time being, and when you're gone, let your light so shine before men and God that your good works shall be known.
A key to the mystery of whether the Templars were in possession of the actual head of Christ may lie in the great demand for holy relics during the Middle Ages. Templars were the masterminds behind a bustling relic trade that spread across Europe, offering everything from the finger bones of popular saints to pieces of the true cross. Templars would sell these questionable relics to churches, which would put them on display in the hopes of attracting pilgrims.
During the time of the Crusades, and certainly during the period that the Templars were in existence, religious relics were probably as common as Beanie Babies are today. There were so many heads of John the Baptist around that they all couldn't possibly be the real McCoy.
Whatever the authenticity of these medieval relics, many experts are in agreement that a Templar vault does exist beneath Rosslyn Chapel. For Laidler, only one step remains for him to prove whether it contains the head of Christ.
Well, excavation's the next stage, to excavate beneath Rosslyn. And I'm of the opinion that if there's anything there, then it's going to be buried very, very deeply beneath the pillar in Rosslyn.
As far as Rosslyn goes, and anything Templar-related being buried underneath the chapel itself, there is a possibility it may be the bodies of some Templars. But as far as it being the severed head of Jesus Christ, it's probably quite unlikely.
I despair of people that want to open up every mystery, because after all, once it's opened and spread to the world, it is no longer a mystery, and people are no longer interested in it. But hopefully with Rosslyn, that will not be the case, because if indeed the vault is opened, we'd probably find a remarkable collection of artifacts. But I don't think we'll find the head of Christ. I think he took it with him.
John Ritchie also takes issue with non-members like Laidler, who claim to be experts on the Templars and privy to their well-guarded secrets.
Let us pray.
So they become experts in the temple, and yet they don't have the esoteric knowledge of actually being part of the Templar Order. It's about like saying he's an excellent sailor, but he's never been on a boat.
If he has secrets that I don't know, then I can't put them I can't make them part of my paradigm. But I'm working on available evidence that I've managed to research over 6 years. If he has evidence that disproves any part of it, he ought to bring it forward.
For now, speculation about what lies beneath Rosslyn may remain unsolved for some time. The St. Clair family, the descendants of the chapel's builder, has refused to consider any excavation. Both the church's foundation and its inscriptions, they say, are too fragile to survive such an undertaking. The Druids were enigmatic sorcerers who ruled over Celtic civilization in the first millennium before Christ. They held secret rituals deep in forest groves across Great Britain, but left very few written records. Perhaps because of that, their religious beliefs and practices have been freely reinterpreted over the centuries. Many saw the Druids as wise old men in white robes who could control the forces of nature. This image became the inspiration for many later fictional wizards, from Merlin the Magician to the characters in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. Others painted a more savage picture of these Celtic priests. Julius Caesar claimed he witnessed Druids building huge hollow wooden effigies stuffed with straw. During harvest rituals, these so-called wicker men were filled with livestock and occasionally human beings and set afire to appease the gods. 2,000 years later, the mystique of the Druids and their strange ceremonies still thrive across much of the British Isles. The very tip of Northern Ireland, where the windswept cliffs of Ulster meet the thick haze of the Atlantic Ocean. A land of infinite beauty and home to one of the Druids' most active followers, Clive Culbertson. Clive's upbringing was typical of Protestant children in Northern Ireland during the 1960s. Ulster's religious conflicts have produced a distinctly conservative brand of Christianity among both Protestants and Catholics. And Clive was raised with a suspicious outlook towards other faiths. Despite this, he always felt that there was little in either religion that celebrated the ancient landscape around him.
People here in Northern Ireland, if they're brought up as Protestants, they look to London and they feel British. If they're brought up as Catholics, they look to Dublin and they feel Irish. And none of them feel connected to this living land of Ulster. And we have our mythology and gods and goddesses that are as wonderful as anything the English or the Irish have.
Clive's discovery of Northern Ireland's hidden history and the religion that would change his life began with a chance encounter. Clive has been a music producer and guitarist for 30 years, playing with some of Ireland's top bands. In 1988, he was touring the country as backup guitarist for veteran rock star Van Morrison. One night, a friend who arranged mystical seminars suggested the band journey to Clonagall Castle, where many of the country's leading mystics and witches met to discuss spiritual matters. There they met a curious old man dressed in traditional Celtic garb, complete with robe and wooden staff. Clive was fascinated by this man, whose name was Ben McBrady, and who called himself the last surviving arch-druid in Ireland. McBrady boasted that he could summon ancient nature spirits that still lingered at many stone circles across Ulster. Clive says he was skeptical of McBrady's claims until he witnessed one of his ceremonies.
I can truly say every fibre of my being trembled. And it actually felt like not only the goddess was listening, but every energy, every tree spirit, every spirit of the rock, every blade of grass was, "Did you call me? Did you call me?"
McBrady told Clive that summoning the spirits of the land began with a simple act of meditation. All he had to do was call out to the deity and try to feel himself becoming connected with the living earth beneath his feet. At the remains of a Celtic site near his house, Clive began practicing what McBrady had taught him. To his surprise, he says, it worked.
It feels like running water. Like there's water running inside. And it's cleansing, and it's purifying, and it's like a mountain spring.
Clive's new girlfriend, Pat, a Protestant from Belfast, was puzzled by Clive's decision to become a druid.
I thought, this is a bit mad, you know, there's nobody that's a druid. You know, what's a druid? They sacrifice people and they worship white bulls. And they wear long gowns and they're not just quite the thing.
Overcoming her initial concerns, she began dating Clive, and after 2 months, Clive proposed marriage. Pat agreed, much to the horror of her family.
My family, of course, went absolutely berserk. They thought, a druid, he's a devil worshipper, you know, and I think they actually thought that he might sacrifice the children. I don't know what they thought.
With Pat's acceptance, Clive plunged himself into learning more about the beliefs of the ancient Druids. he began by seeking out others who may have had experiences similar to his. He soon discovered such people numbered in the thousands. Clive Culbertson is one of Ireland's most active Druid priests. After a series of experiences that he says convinced him that the gods and goddesses of this ancient religion were still alive, he was initiated into several Druid organizations in Britain. Most of these groups, such as the British Druid Order, worship at prehistoric stone circles like Stonehenge in southern England.
There is no doubt that when you're in the circle and you've created your sacred space and you've connected with the god and or the goddess, that you are then at a point of power. And that power can help you.
These stones are so old. They hold a perception of life which is way beyond what we can perceive. Yet we can catch glimpses of that by being with them, about the age, about what they've held, what they've been through, what's molded them, what's carved them.
Key to their rituals is the belief that, like the seasons, human life is intimately tied into the cyclical pattern of nature.
Druidry celebrates essentially rites of passage, and the celebrations that happen, the ceremonies in Druidry, are personal rites of passage, and the rites of passage of the year, which we all share. And those are the solar festivals, the 2 equinoxes, the 2 solstices, and the seasonal festivals.
One of the grandest of these festivals celebrates the autumn equinox and takes place at the Stone Circle at Avebury, 30 miles south of Stonehenge. The equinox occurs when the sun is positioned in such a way that the hours of sunlight equal the hours of night. For the ancient Druids, this phenomenon marked the end of the harvest season and is reflected in the long shadows cast within stone circles. Today's Druids keep this ancient custom alive by calling praise to the 4 quarters of the earth.
May there be peace in the south.
And offering bread and wine in thanks for the life-sustaining crops brought forth by their gods.
For this, we offer her our thanks. May this bread be blessed for the spirits gathered in this circle. In your name, O Mother, so let it be.
Clive erected a circle in his own backyard to duplicate his experiences at Stonehenge. Here he has formed his own group and performed ceremonies venerating the seasons and the ancient Celtic festivals. Clive's wife, Pat, is still a practicing Christian, but she's grown fond of the simple backyard altar.
I think when people drive in, they think we're mad. But I don't mind it. It's quite cosy. I've got used to it. I'm not allowed to walk through it anyway because it does something to the energies of it. So I have to walk around it. But sometimes just I'm defiant and I walk through it and I look at it and say, so there.
Although Pat has accepted her husband's faith, the Druid religion has remained largely underground in Northern Ireland. Clive says the number of those who worship outdoors, like this group at a Druid wedding ceremony, is small. Most prefer to remain anonymous, fearing a backlash if their unusual religious practices should be exposed.
That's such an awful thing that you can't have a belief that you hold dear, that is precious to you, that you're afraid to tell people about because it may affect where you live, how your neighbours approach you, how they look at you in the street. The love of God and Goddess and all goodness. Let the spirits of the 4 directions be thanked for their blessings.
For Clive, far more important than his neighbors' reactions is what he believes the Druid faith can do for the divided people of Northern Ireland.
There are Protestants who've grown up who've never known a Catholic, Catholics who've grown up and never known a Protestant. And through something like Druidry, I believe it's a central meeting point. It's a system that is traditionally older than Christianity. One of the lines at the end of our rituals is, may the harmony of our lands be complete. and what these experiences have done, they have made me realize that the lands are already in harmony, that the only thing that's out of harmony is us.
Why are people like Clive drawn to Druid worship? Is it just one more New Age fad? And is there truth behind Clive's claim that Druids are unwelcome in Ireland?
It doesn't surprise me at all that people are practicing in secret, because there are certain people in the community who would make life very unpleasant. I'm not saying that they would be violent, but they would certainly make sure that your business didn't run quite so well.
Despite some overt hostility, there are now over 100 Druid groups in Europe and America. However, historians point out that their rituals bear little resemblance to the original ceremonies of ancient times, and that the stone circles they prefer for their rites may have been built for entirely different purposes.
I'm very wary of this propensity that the modern Druids have always to go to stone circles, which are monuments which existed 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years before Druidry began. But it is almost as if the stone circle has a particular attraction for people, possibly because it's definitely not a church and it's old, and they don't try to examine the thing intellectually any further than that.
We love these places because they are magnificent physically and they are almost totally mysterious. We know they're thousands of years old. We have some idea of the material culture of the people who built them. We have no idea of what they believed, what kind of political or social arrangements they had. So they might as well be from another planet.
The largest number of modern-day Druids worship in the United Kingdom. But more and more Americans are now joining this mystical ancient religion. 10 miles outside the quaint college town of Amherst, Massachusetts, Druid priestess Ellen Everett Hopman presides over a ceremony venerating ancient deities, which she believes still live in the forest.
And honor be your friend, and luck be your lover, until we meet again. Walk with wisdom.
Ellen is the founder of the Order of White Oak, which attempts to revive the long-lost rituals of the Druids.
We're all inspired by, I think, the same note, the same harp string. We've all heard that call. We've all heard that word Druid, and for some reason, it's very important to us. It's our life.
Unlike similar groups in Europe that worship at ancient stone circles, Druids in America create their sacred spaces deep in the woods. Here they celebrate the forces of nature through Celtic songs, incantations, and pagan rituals they say hark back to a time when civilization was more connected with the earth.
We live in a technological society where we are bombarded with messages to ignore the earth. Rampant consumerism, buy, and damn the consequences. People feel they want to get back to the earth, they want to honor the earth, they want to recognize the seasons, the way our ancestors always did when they were hunters and gatherers and farmers. And they want to get back to the sense that the earth matters. Oh God of sea, to you we pray.
Ellen's position as one of America's leading Druid priestesses did not come to her easily. She says it first took years of soul-searching and an experience she says convinced her that she is reincarnated from Celtic times. Ellen's connection with the Druids began when she was an infant. She was born in Austria in 1951 to American parents. At the time of her birth, archaeologists in Salzburg made a fantastic discovery. Several graves were found that shed light on the history of the Celts, an ancient civilization so extensive that it once covered much of Western Europe in the 1st century BC. Among the tombs were found artifacts belonging to Druid priests, who presided over both the political and religious affairs of the Celtic state. The discovery deeply fascinated Ellen's parents.
My very early childhood years, I just remember my mother talking about the Celts with great reverence and describing the different iron tools and jewelry and things like that. And I just took it for granted. I just thought everybody grew up like that.
Ellen and her family did not stay in Salzburg for long. Her father was a U.S. diplomat who served in various posts across Europe. So Ellen had to uproot her life and move every few years. But more troubling than the isolation she felt was her parents' lack of any religious belief.
My parents both were professed atheists. So while I was being raised, my parents were telling me that God was a myth invented by humans to explain their fears. But the interesting thing is I never bought it. There's this thing, it's called God, and I just had this burning desire to know what it was.
On her own, Ellen began worshiping in secret. By the age of 6, she had built an elaborate altar to the Virgin Mary in her bedroom. Every night she would light candles and kneel before the many icons she had assembled. Ellen says she was fulfilling a need for spiritual devotion that only grew stronger after she graduated from high school. Now living on her own in America, Ellen tried to find a religion that suited her desire to be part of a group that worshiped the earth as sacred and divine. She began exploring Native American faiths, which believe in a vast pantheon of local gods that inhabit the streams and forests.
So for about 5 years, I studied with different Native American teachers. And at one point, one of them said to me, it's wonderful that you're honoring our traditions and it's wonderful that you're honoring our ancestors, but you really need to honor your own. And I didn't know what that meant. How am I supposed to honor my ancestors? I don't know who they are.
For the first time in her life, Ellen was without a spiritual anchor. As she no longer felt any attachment to her life in America, Ellen accepted a chance invitation from friends who suggested she visit them in the Republic of Ireland. Ellen was drawn to many of the ancient Celtic landmarks that lie scattered across the rolling landscape. Friends suggested that she tour a tiny archaeological site off the beaten path in County Cork.
It's a grave that local legend has it that this was the place where the wife of the last Druid of Ireland is buried. I went to that place, and the grief that came on me was palpable. I mean, it was fresh grief, as if somebody had just died. That's how it felt. I started to cry. I mean, the tears were just pouring down. My heart was breaking. I knew somebody that was in that grave.
Ellen says that after reflecting on this experience, and many similar ones, she realized that her bond with the Celtic people went far deeper than she had ever imagined.
It's almost like I'm cast adrift. I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time. Part of me says, I really belong back there. That's my home. But those people disappeared 1,500 years ago.
Ellen now believes it is her life's goal to revive the long-forgotten Druid rituals of the Celts.
Earth Mother, inspire us, O fire of life, O fire of love. Please, Bridget, come to us.
Near her isolated cottage in western Massachusetts, Ellen launched her own group, the Order of White Oak.
Guru Mahagat, thank you for being in the circle. Thank you for being in our hearts. Thank you for being in our lives. Thank you for being here.
Here she and her fellow Druids celebrate the 8 seasonal festivals of the Celts, in ceremonies they say date back thousands of years. Are Ellen's Druid rituals authentic? And do her claims of reincarnation have any place in Celtic history?
Reincarnation isn't part of authentic Celtic belief. People believed that when folk died, that they lived in a kind of other world. It basically means that if I were dead, I would still be here, but I wouldn't be visible to the rest of humanity.
Evidence of this belief can be seen in the Druid festival of Samhain, the one day of the year when they believed the dead could communicate with the living. This occurred on October 31st, the final night of the Celtic calendar, and is celebrated to this day as Halloween.
Halloween has now sort of degenerated in most places into a sort of a big party, the trick-or-treat thing, when originally it was everything which had ever been alive was visible to the people who were alive then. But the people aren't being reincarnated, they just become visible.
Although most modern-day Druids believe in reincarnation, in England there is much less significance placed on one's lineage.
Searching for roots, for searching for where we come from, is a much stronger issue in American Druidry than it is in British Druidry, particularly when people are looking back into Celtic spirituality and saying, well, where do I connect? What's the validity in me looking back to this? In England, we don't tend to be worried about who our teachers are, what our spiritual lineage, what our teaching lineage is. It's just lie down on the earth, feel it, let it feed you, honor it, and that's Druidry.
Many also question Ellen's assertion that she is conducting genuine Celtic rituals.
There are no surviving Druid ceremonies from 2,000, 3,000, whatever years ago, because it was an oral tradition. They knew how to write, but they chose not to. And this gives us a great freedom, because from the scraps that survived, people have been able to reconstruct Druidry since. But it's always reconstructed in the image of what the time calls for.
As with the Knights Templar, perhaps the mystery surrounding the Druids and their sacred rituals explain its growing popularity.
It's the mystery, yeah, the image of the Druids. You know, it's this wise old sage with the white beard and the white robe. You know. I mean, you can look at this guy and you can just think, wisdom. But what wisdom? What did they think? What did they do? Nobody knows, so you can paint them in the colours of your own imagination, which means that the image of the Druid can inspire anyone because they recreate it in themselves.
I think as we approach the millennium, people are naturally tending to be subconsciously or consciously a little bit more spiritual. And we're looking back to that which happened 1,000 years ago. I think it has to do with the fact that people really did have a closer connection with spirituality and with God during those days.
In an age driven by technology and information, it may seem odd that people are returning to these ancient societies. Clearly, the trend is driven by a dissatisfaction with conventional religion. But it also reflects a general desire to get closer to nature. At the same time, wrapping these New Age movements in the mantle of ancient rituals may simply be an attempt to dress up practices that might otherwise be seen as flimsy. I'm Bill Curtis. Thanks for watching The Unexplained.